Good morning. Thank you guys so much for being here. My name is Michele Hand, and I have been a professional actor here in St. Louis for the last 18 years. I came to acting by sort of an indirect route. I was actually at Washington University in the PhD program working on my dissertation, and I had done theater in high school, and as I was sitting there in the library day after day after day, I needed some kind of stress release, something to get me back out into the world. So I went and auditioned for a community theater play. I thought that would be something really fun to do. So I got a part in the play, I did the play, it was great fun. And then there was a professional director who was in the audience who saw me in that show and invited me to do a really small part in his show. It was a minimum time commitment, so I said, that'd be great. So I took that part, which was seen by somebody else, which led to another part, which led to another part, which led to another part. And before I knew it, I was spending a heck of a lot more time at the theater than I was at the library working on my paper. So after a very difficult discussion with my parents, who had just spent the money to send me to WashU in the PhD program, I made the transition from English major to actor. And the reason why I sort of give you that backstory is that I had to do a lot of my training, a lot of my study on the job. And I have been so fortunate here in St. Louis to have some tremendous directors who were also my teachers, castmates who were my teachers. And it also gave me the perspective of when I would show up to go to work, when I would show up in the rehearsal hall, I was watching everybody. And I was watching everybody do everything. How do they learn their lines? How do they prepare? How do they get into character? So I've basically spied on every actor here in St. Louis, Missouri. So without naming names, I'm happy to share some of the observations that I've made. But I'm really interested in what you would like to hear about. What is it about the craft of acting or about St. Louis theater that you have questions about? I would sort of like to start there before I bore you with my outline of topics. Does anyone have any questions? Yes, ma'am.
I'm really interested in how you understand the emotional life of the character you're going to play, and how do you match your emotional state to their, what you believe was theirs, so that it becomes real to the people watching?
Absolutely, that's a great question, and that's sort of, I think, the thing that fascinates people most about actors, right? How do you go up there and cry? How do you get that angry? How do you feel all those things? The first place that I start is, and this might be the English major in me, but it's with the script. If you have a good script, I don't know if you've ever read a book, and in the middle of the book, you're just swept away and you find yourself completely transported. A good script does that. So if you get up there and just don't goof it up by adding too much to it and sort of let the words work on you and through you, that's a great place to start, to tap into that emotional stuff. And that's what makes my performance of, let's say, like a Lady Mac different than, because you know you can't say that word in the theater, right? Everybody knows you can't say the title of the Scottish play. So we either say Mackers or whatever, the Scottish play. What makes my Lady Mac different from someone else's Lady Mac is that her story, what she's going through, is gonna resonate differently with me based on my life experiences. You know, so for me, it was really, this was a woman who loved her husband and wanted her husband more than anything to have it all. And she thought people were standing in the way of that, right? So that's a story that has emotional resonance for me. Not that I've murdered anyone, not that I've done anything right, but I love my husband and I want him to succeed. So I could tap into that for that emotional stuff. And then the words let you take it to a much bigger level, right? Shakespeare gives you that elevated language that makes that rage visible, palpable, makes you shake when you say it. The other big place where you get emotional, how do you access emotional stuff, is in your scene partner. If you open yourself up to being present with your scene partner, in their faces, in what they're saying to you. You know, I've done, I did a show with, oh, God love, it was a play called God's Ear, Jenny Schwartz, and there was an 11-year-old in it who had to play my daughter. It was about a couple that had lost their son in an accident, and the daughter was just desperate for some kind of attention. whenever that little 11-year-old, I can't even think about it now, when that little 11-year-old actress would just look at me and say her lines of, "Why can't you see me?" That's enough for the waterworks right there, right? And the hope is, if you as an actor are authentically in the moment, opening yourself up to whatever emotionally is working on you, the audience feels that. The audience is, it's almost like throwing a pebble into a pond. And the hope is that if you're creating that emotional thing, that in turn gives the audience something to be a part of. And believe it or not, you guys are sort of the third factor, because we can feel it. We can feel it when we're boring you. We can feel it. And it's not your responsibility to give us anything, but you do. So performances can differ wildly from one day to the next, sometimes on the basis, is the audience really sleepy today? Are they getting it? Are they enjoying it? Are they willing to let themselves laugh out loud? Always let yourselves laugh out loud. We love it. We love it so much. That gives us an emotional charge. Does that make sense? Yes.
Memorizing lines.
Yes, sir. Do you have a specific question about it, or you just wanted to launch it?
How do you? I mean, I've participated in a few plays, and it does take some effort to do it. And I'd love to know, particularly if you've got bigger parts and you've got a whole lot. If you've got a few lines, you can manage it. But
Right.
if it gets bigger and bigger, how do you do it?
Absolutely. I have found that there are as many ways for memorizing lines as there are actors, right? But I do think it kind of falls into a couple different categories. Some actors are real audio learners. So I have friends that will read their partner's lines and then leave a blank space, like into their phones, like a voice memo, and then they'll play that in their car. They'll listen to the cue, and then they'll fill in their lines. And if they get it wrong, they rewind it and go back over and over. Repetition is key, right? So each one of these has a different repetitive element. You have other people like me who are more kinetic. So I have to write out all of my lines longhand. I can't type them. It's all longhand, and it's all capital letters for some reason. I have to do it all in capital letters. If I do little case letters, it doesn't make any sense. So I do all capital letters. If I mess up a line, I tear out the sheet and I go back and start the line over. I read my cue line, I write out my line longhand. I know other people who go running, and as they run, they say their lines so that there's kind of a rhythmic component to it. And then I have a friend who makes, she's extraordinary. She makes these little flip card binders. She will cut out the text, paste it on an index card, and then write her line on the back. So she'll look at it, say her line, flip the cue card on these little binder clips to see if she's got the line right. And then she goes through, so she makes these little flip books. So whenever you see Colleen at rehearsal, she's coming in with a little flip book, right? So she's very visual. If it's a really big speech, I find the only way I can learn it is to break it down into chunks. And those chunks usually reflect, like, where does the thought change? So if you get a big Shakespearean monologue, there you're also trying to deal with words that aren't necessarily familiar to you. But if you can follow the thought, like, well, okay, in this first speech that Hamlet's doing, he's saying to be or not to be, right? So he goes on this whole thing, why am I even around? You know, why I should just end it all. That's the first chunk. Then the thought shifts. Oh, but wait, if I end it all, I don't know what's on the other side. It might be way worse than whatever I'm going through here. Maybe I should rethink that. Next chunk of thought. So if I break a big speech like that into these little thought chunks, that's so gross. There's got to be a more gracious way of saying that. But if you break it up into those sort of segments, I can follow the logic. And so as I'm saying the lines, my brain understands that, oh, no, I'm just going to the next point. That's how I get from here to there. Do you have a particular technique that you use? No? Anybody else? Yes, sir.
I'm sure communication has a lot to do with it, but when I'm going to an audition and trying to like figure out what the director wants, because I've been to auditions for something like it's a new play, I have no idea what he's looking for, and it's just really hard to pick up on like how big I should act or how small I should act.
Absolutely. We've all been there. Auditions are a necessary evil of our job, right? And I would argue that most actors are way more terrified of their auditions than they are of opening night. I will say, once we're up in front of you guys, we know you love us, and we know that you want a good story. It's difficult going in that room. My advice is don't try to figure out what the director wants, because you're never going to get it right. The best thing you can do is to go into that room having a really clear idea about who you think this guy is, and that's all you can do. I think a director, and I ran a theater company actually for 5 years here in St. Louis. We were the Orange Girls. We were the first resident theater company at Coca, and that was at a time that there weren't a lot of female artistic directors. So we were excited about getting together, myself and 2 other actors. It was also self-serving. We wanted work. So we thought we'd find a theater company and we can sort of put ourselves in our plays, and in addition to our female friends and our female director people that we knew. So sitting on the other side of that table, it was very clear to me when folks came in the room who had a clear idea of the character and who didn't. So I would say make a choice and then commit 1,010% to it. Because as you guys know, or any actors here in the room, you can go in there and play the part perfectly, but you're too short, or you've got curly hair, or you're too tall, or you're a little too young, you know? It often just really comes down to that. You don't look right with the other person that's been cast in the play already, or we really need to round out the number of women or men in the play, whatever the case may be. But if you come in there committed to an idea of who that person is and are present and authentically commit to that, they'll remember you. And I know everyone says this, but it really is true, and my entire career hinged on it. Even if you don't get that part, if you give a strong, committed performance, they might remember you for something else. So that would be my advice. Yes, ma'am.
When working with like other theater companies in St. Louis, do you think there's some sort of benefit to starting out younger?
Well, that's a great question. I kind of think it depends. So are you, like for instance, is part of the question, would it be of benefit to you to start auditioning for theater companies in town to kind of get your name and your face out there? Absolutely. I would say that one of my strongest bits of advice, especially if you're a performer starting out, say yes to everything, obviously within reason and safety concerns. But saying yes to a small part, saying yes to, will you come do the stage reading for us? Absolutely. Will you usher for our company? Getting your face in front of the artistic directors, in front of the other actors in town so they can meet you and say, oh, I know that kid, she's really, really cool. She's super sweet, right? She's a go-getter. She works really hard. There's a lot of really talented people out there, and getting a job it's not always determined by talent. It just can't be, right? Because there are so many talented people. But sometimes you can get a job because you're really easy to work with. And sometimes you can get a job because everybody knows you're reliable, you will show up on time, you will do whatever needs to be done for that production to be successful. Those are qualities that you can show off in addition to your talent as a young performer. So I would argue, say yes to everything, and when you show up, bring candy to the stage manager, because they are the gods behind the scenes. I'll tell you what, find out what their favorite candy is and bring it to every rehearsal. Be kind to everyone. Be 15 minutes too early to everything. That gives you an incredible foundation for your career that not every auditor that walks into the room is going to have.
Yes, what are some of your favorite productions that you've been in this region or even else?
Oh my gosh. That's such a funny question, because it's typically whatever I'm in at the moment. because that's sort of the most, the most immediate. But a couple ones that really stick out to me. I did a play called Falling here in St. Louis with Mustard Seed Theater. And the director and the playwright, Deanna Gent, is also a good friend of mine. And it was Deanna's story. And the opportunity to get up there, fictionalized version, right, a dramatized version of it. But it was about a mother of an autistic son, actually an entire family, figuring out how to best help this autistic boy in their midst, how to help him and what would become of him as he got older. Those were questions she was really wrestling with. And being able to sort of embody and go on that journey with her was such a gift, and such a gift for our audiences. The number of people with somebody that they knew in their lives that had autism that had not seen their story told, that is an extraordinary thing when you can be a part of something where the story hasn't been told often. And it really connects to people and it makes them feel seen. That is an incredible experience as an actor. And then getting to play Shakespeare is really, I know, that's what everyone says, but you get to be so much larger than life. I feel magnified 1,000 times when I do Shakespearean work, and to be able to live in a story that big with words that beautiful is extraordinary. So I've gotten to be in Richard III, and I've gotten to play Lady Mac, and I've got to be in Hamlet as well, Gertrude in Hamlet. So those roles are really, really great because you can be so much more. Yes, ma'am.
Techniques for like getting into character for like a show or audition?
That's a great question. Shoes. Shoes are really, really big because character is about putting it in your body, right? And we connect to the ground through our feet, right? And there's, especially as women, there's a very different feeling that you have when you connect through the ground in 4-inch heels than when you're in combat boots, than when you're in ballet slippers. And then the minute you get your character shoes, so I'm one of those people like, when can I have my shoes? Because the minute that I get my shoes, that the costume director, in terms of their vision for the character, I know how I move. And depending on how you could move, if you're teetering around on heels, that's gonna affect how you hold your upper body, and then all of a sudden you've got kind of a different voice than if you are grounded in, let's say, you know, I played a military officer, and as soon as I got those boots and I could be grounded through the earth, I felt my entire center drop into here. And something became very defensive about the way that I moved, and I became much more economical. So it sounds silly, but that's a way to build character. So that is kind of that sort of outside in. Another way is when you read the text, and I would advise reading through it 3, 4, 5, 6 times. That first time just to kind of, how did it work on you? But that second and third time, starting to look at, what do other characters say about you? What does the world out there think about who your character is? Making register of that. And then understanding what your character wants and needs. Because the difference between you two guys as best buddies is you want something from your life that maybe complements your best buddies, but it's not necessarily the same. What we want and what we need kind of define us. They define how we talk to other people, they define how we present ourselves to the world, and that's a way of understanding who that person is versus some other character in the play. Does that make sense? Yeah.
So, you're putting yourself out there, you're clearly going to be reviewed.
Right.
And so, do you read reviews, and how do you process those?
Any actor who says they don't read reviews are liars. We all read the reviews, but there is a sort of unspoken rule. You never bring reviews into the theater. Some theaters do, post them in the lobby, which I understand, that's marketing, right? Especially when marketing budgets get smaller and smaller. Reviews are a great way to get some free advertising, right? But for we actors, it's kind of an unspoken thing that you don't discuss the reviews in the room, because the minute that you discuss the reviews in the room, it's not about what you're making together anymore, because reviewers are great, but they can single out performances. They're gonna have a very specific perspective of the story, which may not be the one that you guys put together, which is the great thing about art. You can see one play and get one thing, another person can see it and get something else. But if you let that reviewer's version get in your head, and it's different from what you guys have been working on, that changes your performance. And whereas a performance should always be active and live, it should always be within the confines of what everybody agreed upon and what everybody's been rehearsing, because otherwise there's no structure to it. So I appreciate reviews. I love reviewers and what they do for getting the word out about shows here in St. Louis. Sometimes, like I said, they're the only marketing that a company gets. So I love the function, but I have to love it after the show is closed, and can, keep my head in the game as it goes there. And I do remember though, we all remember the bad reviews. Never forget a review that I got. I was in a 2-person show and the reviewer didn't mention me. I know he subscribed to the thing. If you can't think of anything nice, you don't say anything at all. But that was a glaring omission. So that one I remember. And it was a learning experience, right? I learned to walk across the street when that reviewer came by. No, I learned, you learn. You learn from the times that you get up there and what you do doesn't quite land. Because it's not always going to land. You do your best, right? You give your committed best and hope that people can enjoy it and engage with it. Any other questions?
Hey, Michelle, I got a question.
Yes.
You ever had any scenarios in a performance where there was a huge an obstacle or something chaotic that happened that you had to fight through during the performance?
Yeah, absolutely. Little disasters happen all the time. So you learn how to roll with them. For instance, I did a play called Tally's Folly. And that's a show about a man and a woman. It takes place in a boathouse, right? And at one point, the male character, his foot has to drop through the floor. It's a sight gag. It gets referred to in the text. Well, one night we were doing our show and I just backed up a little bit too far while we were doing thing and my foot went through the floor. So I've blown the visual gag. I've blown the big lead up to the moment later. How is his foot gonna throw through the floor by accident later on with it? And all I could do is go, I fell through the floor. And he went, yes, you did. Can you help me out? So he helped me out and we went on, and then later on, he finds his way back there, falls through the floor, and then we just sort of ad-lib this, really? You fell through the floor? You're like, that's all you can do. You just work around that, I was in a production where, I saw a production where this was much more spectacular. The actor threw a glass against a wall. And one of the pieces of glass, even stage glass can sometimes cut, flew back and sliced her hand. And it was an all-white set. And so she, as she tried to kind of stop the bleeding, kind of made the most of it. Dragged it across the sofa, made it sort of part of the violence of the scene. And all you could think, like your actor brain is like, that's amazing, right? But the other actor part's like, your stage manager's gonna hate you, because cleaning up all that stuff. So I guess the answer is you work whatever is thrown in front of you. You make it part of the action, and sometimes it can be, I think, really entertaining for the audience. Yes, ma'am.
What's your experience with understudies and how understudies can be the most important part of the show, even if they're just in chorus?
I think understudies are amazing, and I feel awful, but I have never actually worked in a show with an understudy. I will say here in St. Louis, the Rep and the Muni have some people who double up on roles, but for the majority of the companies here in St. Louis, if you're sick, you need to take a lot of cold medicine and figure out how you're gonna get yourself on there, right? That being said, I think understudies are an incredible asset to a company, and if there were ways that we could offer more opportunities for actors, if there were budgets that could allow for that, I think it'd be incredible, because they have to learn, you talk about the hardest working actor in the show, they have to learn all the lines, all the blocking, and sometimes play a different part as well. So I think it just goes back to that original theory of no matter what you're given, if you're an understudy, you be the best understudy they've ever seen, and that will speak so highly of you and your abilities. Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned the St. Louis theater scene, but have you performed in any other cities, and if so, what were the differences?
So St. Louis Actors Studio did a show here called Day of the Dog that they took to New York for an off-Broadway run at the 59 East 59th Theater, which is kind of a theater that specializes in new works, a 3-story theater. And it was the most fun 10 weeks of my life. It honest to God was. I can't think of any actor that, and it was in the Upper East Side, so it's a gorgeous neighborhood that you're walking to work. I'm like crossing Fifth Avenue to go to work with my Starbucks and, living the dream as I retreat to my tiny little apartment in Brooklyn, later in the evening. But what I noticed there is audiences are a little bit more reserved. They're a little bit more, show me what you can do, right? We had very generous audiences, but I found that there was a little bit more of degree of reserve, but if you performed well, they were very, very generous at the end. It's a difficult place to work because here in St. Louis, you can find pockets of quiet and pockets of rest before you go in for a big emotional show. There's no rest, right? So you can either draw on that energy of being on the subways and being in the crowds and people yelling at you. You can draw on that and make it kind of part of the energy that you bring into the room. And often I could do that, but if you're a little tired, it can be hard to find a place to sort of recharge your batteries. So I found myself spending a lot of time during the day in museums, in places of quiet, so that I could find a little rest before jumping back into the fray. But it's an awesome experience. It's an awesome experience being in that town and seeing your face on a marquee. It's cool. Sir, did you have a question?
Yeah, I was curious. You do a role, and now 4 years later, you come back to the same play, and maybe in the same role. There's a whole different group of people.
Yeah.
Just wondered about your thoughts.
Absolutely. So that play I mentioned before, Falling, we actually did do that twice. We did it with an original cast, and then they took it to Broadway and cast all big New York names for that, off Broadway. Then they revived it as part of like their 8 or 9 year, anniversary here. So I played the mom again. I guess we a little stretched like how old Tammy was. But we did use, and my husband was the same, but my daughter daughter was the same too. So it was really just the son with autism. We had a different actor for that because our actor had moved to New York and was in the middle of his own production. So that does change everything. It changes everything. And I don't know if it's because that character is kind of the center of the play and his energy determines, but our first actor was a little bit more unpredictable, a little bit bigger with an undercurrent of danger and kind of violence in the outbursts of that autistic character, which created a very specific kind of environment. Our second actor was gentler, and his was a more inward kind of autism, that sort of retreat into his own world, and the violent outbursts weren't as extreme. It was more gradual, and that changed everything. So the lines were the same, the set was the same, a lot of the same people came back for audiences, but they got a very different story. So the first one was a story a family in the middle of a tornado. The second was a family maybe slowly drowning in a flood, right? That's sort of the way that I describe the two different energies that each production brought. And I know I say energy a lot, that sounds very woo-woo, but part of acting is woo-woo. Part of acting is absorbing energy, absorbing what you guys give, what another person gives, and engaging with people on kind of that level, as opposed to our everyday conversations, right? That's why we go, because we get to experience life told at kind of a different pace or a different level. Yes, ma'am.
What happens if you get sick on stage?
Oh, I actually had that happen. Well, not quite on stage. I had food poisoning. And did a show. I went out for my birthday the night before, got food poisoning, came in the next day and had 2 shows. So my lovely stage, this is, again, why you bring candy to the stage manager. I had 4 buckets on each corner of the stage. So if you feel yourself start to get sick, you talk about it with your actors before. You let them know what's going on. You let your director know if they're still around. You let your stage manager know for sure. You say, I'm not feeling great, and if I have to disappear, I will disappear. And in the middle of a scene where I had to chop onions, yeah, I chopped the onions and I looked at my scene partner and I said, I'll be right back. Ran off stage, got sick, came back on and said, what were we saying? And that's when you realize what a magical group of unicorns actors are, because the way that your cast rallies around you, because when you go through the emotional experiences of a script together, you are engaging emotionally in a very real way, and it forms instant bonds. These people become your best friends, right? You might be kissing on them, you might be screaming at them, and they take care of you. So God love my actors that day, the way they took care of me and helped me through that performance. So you do what you have to do, and your stage manager makes sure you drink lots of water. Yes, ma'am.
Have you ever worked or performed with the playwright, either working with you to develop your performance or being in the audience? And what's that experience like?
Nerve-wracking. Yeah, especially when they come to see opening and you're like, please let me say all the lines exactly right. You know, please don't let me paraphrase a part that they really, really like. That Day of the Dog that I did in New York, Daniel Damiano came to St. Louis and then was in New York for the entire process. He was at every rehearsal working with us and sometimes changing lines. Nancy Bell is a local playwright and incredible actress. I did the Shakespeare in the Streets performance. That was actually a really interesting experience in that we had an entire production planned for last year. It was at the weekend in October when they announced the Stockley verdict. We were supposed to be on the library steps downtown, and we were not given permission from the St. Louis police to perform any of it. Each day it was a maybe, maybe, maybe. All 4 performances were canceled. They brought the play back, but some of the artists involved in the production and some of the community members, because Shakespeare in the Streets, they take a Shakespearean play, sort of distill it down and make it a story about the community. So we have non-actors, community members, we had dancers, we had musicians. Some of those actors said the play was King Lear and it hinged on race and the racial divide. They said, could we talk about what happened in October and how racial divide shut this thing down? Can we incorporate that in the play? We spent the entire year, all of us getting together, reworking the play together, changing things to reflect what had happened in October. So when we got to do it this year, it included the history of our community. That was a really cool experience, really cool.
Unfortunately, I think time is up.
Great.
This is fantastic. Thank you, Michele.
Thank you guys, thank you so much for your attention today.